face. Oh, let's breathe it in. Take a look around. Beautiful view, beautiful people. So let's take a deep breath and just for everything that we've been through to become here at this moment, present, we are grateful. So I begin with one of my favorite all-time readings from Khalil Gibran. He was a good carpenter. The doors he fashioned were never unlocked by thieves, and the windows he made were always ready to open to the east wind and to the west. And he made chests of cedar wood, polished and enduring, and plows and pitchforks strong and yielding to the hand. Now this, my house, was builded by many hands 30 years ago. I sought builders and carpenters in all the towns of Galilee. They each had the skill in the art of building, and I was pleased and satisfied with all that they did. But come now, and behold 2 doors and a window that were fashioned by Jesus of Nazareth. They, in their stability, mock all else in my house. All my doors and windows are yielding to the years, save these that he made. They alone stand strong against the elements. And what is passing strange is that that laborer who was worthy the wages of 2 men received but the wages of 1 man. And that same laborer now is deemed a prophet in Israel. Had I known then that this youth, with saw and plane, was a prophet, I would have begged him to speak rather than work, and I would have overpaid him for his words. And now, I still have many men working in my house and fields. How shall I know the man whose hand is upon his tool, from the man upon whose hand God lays his hand? Yea, how shall I know God's hand? So my name is Mindy Audlin. I want to welcome you to our very first service here as Unity of the Foothills at the Buchanan Rec Center. Welcome. I'm glad to have you here. This is an exciting Sunday for us. So I think the question, how shall we know God's hand, is a wonderful question for us. Khalil Gibran was raised Christian. He was from Lebanon. He came to the United States. He was an author and a poet and an artist, an amazing person. And the question that he leaves us with is a powerful one. How shall we know God's hand expressed in our world? So, any of you been to the Grand Canyon? Anyone visited the Grand Canyon? Ever sat on the edge of the Grand Canyon and just kind of looked out over the expansiveness of it? It's quite a marvelous thing to behold. So there's a Unity minister, his name is Eric Butterworth, and in one of his books he talks about a man who was sitting there on the edge of the Grand Canyon, and as he was looking over the edge, he wondered to himself, something must have happened here. Something happened here that created something really powerful. So as we step into Easter, you ever have that feeling like, I don't know what just happened here, but something just happened here. Something just happened. So we step into Easter, and the Easter story is, it's got its ups and its downs, and its goriness, and its celebration, and it's a very interesting story. So we're here to celebrate the events of Easter, the events that gave rise to a new religion, because I don't know exactly what happened back then 2,000 years ago, but I think we could sit here on the edge of history and say, something happened here. Something happened that was powerful enough and transformational enough to change the world, to transform the world as we look back in history. So I was reading about how do you grow a church these days? Everyone said, oh, church is dying and spirituality is, how do you get people to church these days? So I found this article that said, here's what you do. You want to get people to church? You have debates. So they gave an example, a case study of a church, and they did a debate on whether the resurrection was literal or metaphorical. And they packed the house. They had to go to a different venue to get more people in there. So it's like, if you want to pack a church, here's what you do. You create a controversy. You create a controversy, and you have those people who believe that it was literal on one side, and then you put the people who believe it was metaphorical on the other side, and then you all have them say, here's why you're wrong, and here's why I believe it, and they go at each other for a couple hours, great time, and you'll pack the house. But the problem is, we're unity. We don't do that. So we aren't about creating divisiveness. So whether you see the resurrection as a literal thing that happened, or you see it as a metaphorical thing, or maybe you're somewhere in the middle, we don't really teach history. What we look at is, what does it mean to us? What can we learn from it? How can we walk away from the experience, not just heated up and passionate, but transformed? How do we walk away and say, what does that story mean in me? How is that story alive in me? What does resurrection look like in my own heart and in my own life? And the truth is, you can go to any religious tradition. You can go to, you can just look at the sunrise and the sunset, and you can see the story of resurrection. That every day we sink into darkness, and every day we know that the sun will rise again. The sun will rise again. That is a universal message. I was reading about the Utes that made this land home thousands of years, and their spring celebration was the bear dance, celebrating the awakening from a hibernation and celebrating the arrival of spring. So it's a universal story. So we look for, what is the universal truth that we can pull from the stories? So this morning I have got 3 universal truths that we can pull from the resurrection story. And the first one is, as spiritual beings, we are here to rise above the illusion of duality. So as we look at that week, we look at everything from where we were last Sunday and Palm Sunday and all the grandeur of that, and then we look at the progressions of the week, what we see is Jesus. He was polarizing, right? There were those who followed and believed, and there were those who didn't, and there were those who thought he was a savior, and there were those who thought he was a heretic. And he created polarization, but he didn't step into it. He was able to rise above it and not be judgmental in the face of that. He could stand in his own truth, even in the midst of the controversy that his truth brought forward. Our culture, you may have noticed, is somewhat addicted to polarization. I've never seen it like I see it right now in our culture. Do you see it? In politics, in religion, it's like, what do you believe? And then we find our sides and we find our tribes. And the way our culture is set up right now, it is easy to find our tribe. We can go on Facebook and it'll say, here's people that we recommend because you think just like them and you can like them and be friends. And so we build this tribe of people who think like us. And so we get together and we're all very sure that we're right. But then there's the other thing, there's the other people who think differently, and they've got their tribe. And then when the tribes get together, what do? We try to prove that ours is right, and which usually means yours is wrong. And then we have this polarization. And right now, I've never seen it in our world like it is right now. So what if this is, more than ever before in history, a time for unity? What if through our spiritual teachings we could learn to rise above that conversation and find what is true? So when Jesus came before Pilate, it says Pontius Pilate entered his quarters. He asked Jesus, where are you from? And Jesus didn't answer. And Pilate said to him, do you refuse to speak to me? Don't you know that I have the power to crucify you? And Jesus said to him, you have no power over me unless it has been given to you from above. So he knew that you don't have power over me. Your opinion of me has no influence over me. I can stand in my truth and do what I feel called to do, and what comes out of that is divinely guided. If I just follow my truth, follow my love, follow my heart. So that's the first universal truth that we see, is how do we rise above that? There was a blog that came out this week from Lynn McTaggart, who many of you know, called The Power of Eight, and many other books, The Intention Experiment, lots of other books. So she wrote this blog post in response to the march last week, and all these young people stepping forward and saying, enough, that, it's coming from this place of love. We need to find a unified way to approach the social issues of today. And she said, way back, if you look historically, way back in the 90s, late 80s, 90s, way back, a couple decades ago. Back then, the big issue was abortion, free, pro-choice, pro-life. You had this big faction here, and abortion clinics were being targeted, and it was a different issue, but it was the same polarization that was happening. And she shared the story of a woman who was a family therapist in Cambridge, and she was watching a debate, and she recognized all the symptoms of family dysfunction in that debate. Like, wow, this is like, I wonder if family therapy would help our society overcome this way that we communicate with each other, where it's just like no one's listening to each other, we're just wanting to be right. So what she did was she invited together some women on both sides of the issue. And the first thing she did was she invited them over to a dinner, but the rule was you couldn't divulge which side of the issue you were on. First step is, we just get to know each other. It's not about what side you're on, we get to know each other. And then they begin having these meetings. But instead of having them set, this side's on this side of the table, this side's on this side of the table, they mixed it up, they sat in a circle. They sat side by side. And they began to identify, what are the words that we use? Murder, what are some of those inflammatory words that we can stop using? We don't need to communicate it that way. And what they started doing was every woman would share their story. They'd share their experience and why they believed the way they did and why they were so passionate about the cause. And every single one, from different perspectives, different viewpoints, they all shared their story. And they did this, they met in secret for about 6 years, this group of women. And in that time, what they found was their common ground. They found that they all cared about young women, they all cared about women, they all cared about family, they all cared about life. And from that common ground, they found ways to work together, to provide education for teenagers, to find better ways that kids could get adopted. They started changing the system based on what they agreed on. And then there was a shooting at an abortion clinic, and they decided it's time for us to go public, and they held a press conference. And the press was fascinated. They had these two opposing viewpoints, and so the press, of course, their question is, so you've been debating this for 6 years, who won? Who won? Who's the winner of this debate? And what the women said, which is so interesting, is they said, each of us, because we've shared our story, because we've shared where we come from, each of us is more committed than ever to the position that we held in the beginning. I know that this is my cause, this is mine to do. And so the reporter said, well, then it was a failure. You didn't convince anybody to change their mind. And they said, oh, absolutely not. Because now we love each other. Now we watch each other's kids. We hang out together. We go to dinner together. We love each other. Now we can respect people. We can be with people who are completely different and be with them in love and respect. Transformational. So I think that is the first universal truth that Jesus demonstrated, is that we can rise above that duality and just stand in love and forgiveness. That when those of us, that our friends betray us, we can stand in love and forgiveness. And when we are assaulted by the crowds, we can stand in love and forgiveness, being true to ourselves as we move forward on our path. So that's the first one. Khalil Gibran has a quote. He says, spare me the political events and the power struggles, as the whole earth is my homeland, and all men are my fellow countrymen. That we are, in the end, all one. So let us affirm this together. So repeat after me. I rise above the illusion of duality. Together?
I rise above the illusion of duality.
I take a stand for unity.
I take a stand for unity.
Breathe that in. And feel it kind of, resurrect something inside of us, that truth. So the second universal truth that we see is that there is this thing called death, and that it is an illusion as well. That what appears to be gone is never really gone. So if you look to the biblical narrative of what actually happened, what was the resurrection, what you see is that it's a story that evolves. And so as we go, I'm going to go through the evolution of the story biblically in chronological order, in the order in which the stories are written. And think about, what does it mean to you? What does it mean to you? So the earliest writings are from Paul. Paul wrote about 20 to 34 years after the resurrection. And the way Paul described it was kind of like Jesus came to him in a vision. Jesus came to select people in a vision and provided guidance. And I don't know, how many of you, this is kind of a personal question, but have any of you ever had that experience of someone who's passed on and they come to you in a vision or in a dream? Have you had that experience? Yeah, a lot of us have. So that's kind of what it sounds like to me in these early writings, is that Jesus was coming to people in visions with guidance. And that was the earliest writings, references to resurrection. The next book was the book of Mark. So this was written after Paul died. So we're going forward in about 9 decades after the actual earthly ministry of Jesus. And in Mark's version, I like this. We see Jesus. He dies. He's put in the tomb, and then we see the women coming and they're mourning. They're mourning the empty tomb, and then they meet a messenger. A person comes and says, "Jesus isn't here. He's been raised." And he tells the women, say, "Go find the disciples, tell them to meet with you in Galilee." And it says that the women were terrified, and they left in fear and didn't tell anybody. The end. Well, the next writers, Matthew and Luke, I guess they thought that wasn't a good enough ending, because they kind of expounded on that a little bit. So if we go, and these are written again later. So Matthew and Luke both had Mark as a reference, and then they wrote their Gospels. So Matthew and Luke come along. And in Matthew, the messenger now is an angel. So an angel comes and sees the women, and for the first time it becomes a physical resurrection. So it's like, okay, there's Jesus. Oh, I didn't recognize you, but there you are. Hug. I can embrace you. You're real. And then Luke comes along. He has another angel. So now there's 2 messengers. There's 2 angels in Luke's story. And this time, instead of saying, "Go to Galilee," he says, "Stay in Jerusalem." So a little different tweaks on the story, but that's how it is evolving at that point. And then comes the book of John. Now that one was written last. It was the final one of the Gospels that we know, a decade later. And in John's version, it's very real. It's very physical. We got the doubting Thomas. He's like, "Go ahead, touch me." It's real. They have dinner together. They eat fish together. It's, fish fry with Jesus. It's like, it's very, very tangible and real. So what really happened? Something happened. I don't know what happened. Something happened. And it doesn't matter, in Unity we don't say, "This is our creed, this is what you have to believe in order to follow our teachings." What we look at is, are we learning and are we growing? Can we find something in ourselves that can learn something from the story? Like, what does it mean to me? What does it mean to me that nothing ever ends? That death is an illusion? That we are forever connected to anyone that we've ever loved? I saw a story about a Sunday school teacher, and she was bringing the kids in at the end of the service, and she asked the kids, she said, "Now, who knows why it's so important to come into the sanctuary very quietly?" And one of the little girls raised her hand, and she said, "It's because people are sleeping." So even in church sometimes we're asleep, right? So sometimes we're not, just because we come together in spiritual community, we aren't always awake to our true spiritual identity. That's what we're here to do, is to wake each other up and to be awake to that eternal presence of life. So if we look to the Easter story and the message that's in it, what we see is that it has a lot in common with faith traditions of all kinds. In fact, so much so that we call this Sunday Easter Sunday. Easter was a pagan goddess of spring. Oestra was the pagan goddess of spring. She was the goddess of the dawn. She was the goddess of the rising sun. And they said, "Close enough, pagans, come on and celebrate with us in this one big spring party." And so when we call it Easter Sunday, we really are referencing pagan traditions which celebrated the same thing. They had the eggs that represented the life inside that we can't quite see. It's in that tomb. The Christians said, that's just like the tomb. And so they took those Easter eggs that the pagans had, and they said, if you took your egg and you crack it together, it's like the cracking of the tomb. And so they took those traditions, and they're like spin doctors, Christian spin doctors. Like, here's how that understanding of spring is the same as what we experience in our story of the resurrection, that life is eternal. There is no end. It goes on, and that which we love is always accessible to us. So, this is a fun one too. So the hares, the Easter bunny? The Easter bunny was actually a hare. And the reason why is, in the pagan tradition, hares are different from rabbits and bunnies because rabbits and bunnies are born blind and furless and helpless. But hares are born awake. So I think it's no accident that the final thing that we see Jesus do is forgive. Forgive, and forgive, and forgive, and forgive. Forgive them, Father, they know not what they do. Forgiveness is that barrier to absolute pure love. And so he demonstrates for us the most heinous thing you can imagine. What if we could forgive that? And in doing so, what if we open ourselves to who we truly are as beings of light, as beings of love? And that love is what endures, the purity of that love. So this is, it's funny, I wrote this talk and I'm like, I have this great story and I forgot to put it in the talk. So I'm going to kind of throw it in there. Anyone ever heard of something called the broccoli tree? Have you heard of the broccoli tree? So there was this guy in Sweden, photographer, and he was on his commute to work, he passed this tree every day. And it looked like a piece of broccoli. It was one of those perfect trees. He had lots of branches, and it had this wonderful canopy. It looked like a piece of broccoli. So one day, back in 2013, he decides he's going to photograph the tree. So he takes out his little iPhone, takes a picture. There's the broccoli tree, puts it up on Instagram. It's like, oh, yeah, great picture of the tree. Well, the next week or so, he sees it, and it looks a little different, so he takes another picture, puts it up on his Instagram account. And then he started doing that like every couple weeks. He'd put up a picture of the broccoli tree. And every now and then he put a little comment there, and he started getting likes. In the beginning, he got 43 likes on his picture of the broccoli tree. I'm like, oh, that's pretty cool. So now he keeps doing it. The thing is, people start really liking these pictures of the broccoli tree. And it's not just the tree that he's photographing, it's the life that happens around it. So sometimes there's a picture and there's a bird flying in, or there's a couple in love underneath the canopy, or there's people walking by. There's just life happening all around this tree, and he captured all these different images. And people start liking it. In fact, so much so that he eventually creates his own Instagram account for the tree. So you can go to Instagram, and the broccoli tree is an account on Instagram, and you can see all of these beautiful, beautiful photographs. And so he starts doing it every week. So now he gets in the habit. He's taking pictures of the broccoli tree, and he's getting a better camera and taking better pictures, and it's these beautiful. And now people are starting to really like it. So now people are like, oh, the broccoli tree is its own thing. It has its own name. So they start liking it. They start doing a broccoli tree calendar. They do broccoli tree prints. You can get the broccoli tree prints. In fact, it got so big that the broccoli tree artist decided to do a gallery showing of his broccoli tree images underneath the canopy of the broccoli tree. He got to where he would, instead of taking pictures of the tree, he saw people coming to take pictures of the tree, and he would take pictures of people taking pictures of himself with the tree. So it became famous. Everybody knew about the broccoli tree. In fact, you could go to Google Maps and put in the broccoli tree, and it'd show you exactly where this tree was in Sweden. So it's like the most famous tree on social media. It's the broccoli tree. 27,000 followers for this tree. And then in September 2007, one morning, drives up to take his picture, and something's different. And when he looks closer, he notices one of the branches, somebody started sawing through it. And he was so upset, so he goes on Instagram. It's like, you cannot unsaw a tree. What are you thinking? You can't undo this. And sure enough, damage was done. Within 3 days, the city came, knocked down the whole tree. All you see now is this stump, where all of these beautiful branches used to be, where all of this life used to happen. And so the question was, should he have even done it in the first place? After all, his love of this tree caused people all around the world to love this tree, so much so that you put your love out there, eventually someone's going to come and just whack it down. The more you put it out there, the more famous it is, the more you're putting it at risk. Was it worth it? And so the question is, if you think about all the people who came to Sweden specifically to see that tree, all the people who sat under its shade, all the people who were drawn to it, all the people around the world with pictures of it, who look at that photograph and it makes their day a little bit better. Was it worth it? When we love, we risk. And when we share that love boldly, there's always the chance, as we see in the crucifixion, that there will be those who want to take it down. The only way they can feel powerful or have intention, or whatever the cause may have been, there are those who will try to destroy the things that we want to create. So do we still create? And the beautiful thing is, so now that broccoli tree is a legend. You can't unsaw a tree, but you also can't unsee a tree. And everyone whose life was impacted by that tree, that doesn't go away. Love is our legacy. And I think that's the final thing that we can learn from the resurrection story is there was a purity of love that left a legacy that we've been living into for 2,000 years. That which is born in love endures. George Bernard Shaw had said, life is not a brief candle for me. It is a sort of splendid torch, which I've got a hold of for a moment, and I want it to burn as brightly as possible before handing it on to future generations. So, we stand here in a new place, a new beginning, a new name, Unity of the Foothills. And the question is, what will our legacy be? Will it be a legacy of love? How do we boldly, despite the risks, put our hearts out there in a big way and share our love with each other, with the divine, and with the community around us? So let us affirm together, repeat after me. Let my life leave a legacy of love.
Let my life leave a legacy of love.